Good evening and welcome to the October 18th, 2017 meeting of the Gaithersburg Planning Commission. The first up is the approval of our minutes, and I think we're gonna visit a technicality with Assistant City Attorney Frank Johnson. And what is it we need to do about this?
Well, actually, you have a couple of options. First of all, and many of the boards and commissions that I think it's a city tradition, if you didn't attend the meeting for which the minutes were taken, you pretty much considered that you shouldn't vote on them. That's actually nowhere in Robert's Rules of Order. And when you look at the explanations of how to run a meeting and how to approve minutes, consistently the theme is approving minutes is not a matter of approving who said what, or they're not a transcript. They are a record of action. So the theme that comes forward is any member of a board can properly vote. It is appropriate to hear what people say who were at the meeting, who have personal knowledge, but you're not voting based on personal knowledge. It's not like you're writing a citation or something like that.
Fair enough.
Additionally, doing a motion.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah. Well, there could be instances where, while we say people shouldn't recuse, people might choose to do so, and you end up then, let's say on a 5-member board, you have only 1 or 2, which isn't going to be sufficient because you don't have a quorum present to be able to make a decision. In that instance, the chair can, because there's also no requirement that minutes have to be formally approved by a motion. Approval of minutes can be a matter of the chair simply saying, okay, here are the minutes. Do we have any corrections? Hearing none. Are there any objections to their approval? That then puts the burden on somebody to come forward with a specific objection. Hearing none. That's another way to approve them. So.
Okay. Well, I hate to burden anybody, so why don't I just go straight to the motion with the understanding that if you feel qualified, and we'll need 3 to vote on the minutes, please do so. So, is there a motion on the minutes of our October 4th, 2017 meeting, please?
I move approval of the minutes from October 4th, 2017.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And any abstentions? So it passes 4-0. Thanks very much for that clarification. Sure. Boy, did we just make
thrilling
TV. Excellent. All right.
See how useful it is to have.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Didn't say that on TV.
So we actually have a very thin agenda tonight. We're going straight to the discussion portion of the agenda with no record plats, consent items, or site plans. And first up is the discussion about the historic preservation element of the master plan and the draft of that newly formed section. And it looks like Chris Berger and Rob Robinson from staff are here ready to make
Good
it happen.
evening, Commissioners. So the reason we're coming before you this evening, going back, and Chris did a great job of attaching a lot of things in your packet. Going back to last year, we began the endeavor of updating the historic preservation element, which is one of the first elements we want to do before we move into transportation and land use, with the thought being we sort of wanted things like this and potentially Parks and Rec put into place before we make land use recommendations. Last year, we started a work session began the process with the Planning Commission and the Historic District Commission to sort of see what your thoughts were about how we should guide this document. Master plans are living documents. So again, the one in 2007 served its purpose. It was time to move on. There were many things, as with the master plan, if it's not explicitly overwritten or revised, it still remains in place, so we didn't have to replay everything from the previous element. Following that, staff began working primarily with our author, Chris Berger, our historic preservation planner, and we moved forward. We are rapidly approaching the point where we think, under state law, that we're ready to formally advertise. But before we do that, we wanted essentially to conduct individual work sessions with both the HDC and the Planning Commission to get any other comments out of the way. Last month, we went before the Historic District Commission, and as expressed in Chris's memo, they basically gave us 3 comments. We can express here that, again, the first comment about, adding something along the lines of how, for lack of a better term, to do staff approvals for the HDC, we're going to incorporate. The second one, the thumbnails, we're probably not going to incorporate, candidly. It's a little difficult. It throws off the formatting, but that's not to say, going forward, a photo album may not be included as an appendices to the primary document. The third one, with the revised maps, we're also going to be incorporating. So now it's our
And to
turn
be
to
fair,
come.
Rob, I mean, the suggestion about staff approvals is a good one, but it's really that's regulation, not necessarily master plan.
But oftentimes, as we mentioned, some of the recommendations set the stage for when going forward, the text amendments or actions
sure.
over time come, you can fall back to that. So this evening, we're coming before your body again, even though you will see this during the formal joint public hearing process period, but we wanted the opportunity, and essentially what we're looking for is sort of what we asked the HDC. We're looking for consensus comments from the commission to be considered. I know Commissioner Weich has submitted her stuff to also frame the discussion. So again, the difficulty comes as we have with other elements. We're really not looking for a list of individual ones, but something sort of that the commission is agreement that staff should consider before we do our final edit, our final cleanup. And right now our goal is hopefully to have this hit the streets by the end of this month in order to be positioned for a joint public hearing in January. We want to get it obviously a little bit longer than 60 days with the holidays falling in between. It's sort of somewhat disingenuous to go, you have 60 days, but we know 3 of them you're going to be busy with Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, and Christmas and New Year's. So we want to be able to have those.
Sure.
So candidly, we're here to answer questions. Chris is going to give a presentation, walk the commission through the actual element as designed right now, and then we'd like to hear from you. So with
Good.
that, I'd like to turn
All
it
right,
over to
great,
Chris.
Thanks.
Good evening, Commissioners. So I'm briefly going to summarize the document, and what we should have on the screen in just a moment is the cover. We try to use as many photos as possible to illustrate the resources that we have here in Gaithersburg. Chapter 1, the overview. The document begins with a brief synopsis of the preservation element, including this Venn diagram that shows how preservation plays a role in the 3 areas of sustainability: environmental, social, and economic. Chapter 2, the introduction, notes some of the challenges and opportunities for preservation in the city. It goes on to describe the role of the preservation element and how it can be used and how it relates to other elements, such as land use, community facilities, environmental sustainability, and parks and recreation. The introduction also had as a description of the 2003 element with analysis of that document and how it will be utilized going forward, as Rob mentioned. Continuing in the introduction chapter, we break down the city's preservation program into these 6 areas and describe the role each plays. Advocacy would be the plans and policies that support preservation efforts. Advocacy can come from a variety of entities such as local, state, and federal government or nonprofits. Administration is the operating framework for the preservation program. Preservation staff like myself and also the HDC, they fall under this category. Identification is how older properties are brought to light through structured research and survey. Management are the tools to protect historic resources, such as the city code and our design guidelines. Incentives and benefits are the perks available to historic property owners, such as tax credits and easements. And education relates to how we heighten awareness about Gaithersburg's past. In Chapter 3, we broke down the element of the development of the city into 6 eras and highlight surviving notable projects from each of those eras. These range from the Summit Hall farmstead construction in the early 1800s and the arrival of the B&O Railroad and development of Old Town later that century, to the arrival of mist in the 1960s and more recent developments such as the Kentlands and Lakelands, Washingtonian, and Crown Farm. Chapter 4 has lists and maps for the historic sites that were designated before the 2003 preservation element. We then have maps, descriptions, and photos for the sites designated after that element was published, and maps and descriptions of the 3 courtesy review areas. That chapter concludes with tables and maps showing places with the potential to be designated and also other resources of note. Chapter 5 goes back to that Venn diagram in the overview at the beginning to detail how preservation furthers the 3 sustainability goals. First, we discuss environmental sustainability and how it relates to historic preservation. Next is economic sustainability and how these 7 aspects support preservation. And then social sustainability and how preservation helps further that goal. And finally, objectives and action items, the last chapter, provide a vision for preservation in the city going forward. It is organized around the 3 sustainability components, again, economic, social, and environmental, and the 6 preservation program areas that are described in Chapter 2. So with that, I open it to discussion.
Sounds good, thanks very much.
Yeah, that's great.
Any questions or comments? I'll open with a couple, I guess, then if, in no particular, and again, not in no particular order. One of the comments from the HDC had something to do with not repeating the current policy or master plan elements that dealt with historic preservation. Are they saying that this should just look like an amendment, or what exactly are they leading up to, or what are you proposing that caused that comment?
Well, as Rob mentioned, that the preservation, the 2003 document is a living document. So even though we're doing this new document, it doesn't override the previous. So
It doesn't, okay.
yes.
Unless we explicitly discuss, that we're amending a recommendation such as, sorry to cut in,
No problem.
like references to HPAC which no longer exists. So
Yeah.
that's why certain things, the discussion about the formation of the HDC and designated communities. So there are some tweaks, but again, with every element to begin to rewrite everything that's still in play would start creating gigantic documents.
Okay, but it couldn't be just an update to that and have a new date on it without having to rewrite it all? Is that?
We
is it not
tried to
following-
summarize as much as possible. Like, for example, the previously designated resources in the 2003 document, we have photos for each and long summaries for each. So in this document, we just have tables. and
Oh,
move
I see,
forward.
okay.
So we're trying to not repeat what was done in the 2003 document, but there's some stuff that is going to be
Right.
described again.
Okay. The other question I was going to ask was sort of, again, a thematic one. And if you, all the things you say are right about why preservation is important and why it carries a high kind of policy level within our master planning process. What though, since the 2003 element was written, would you say are the top problems that this needs to solve or needs to address?
I think the 2003 element lacks information on renewable technology, which has certainly grown
Right.
since it was adopted in 2007. And I hope that this document covers that growth in preservation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Also, I noticed when we went through this in 2003, and actually even before that, there was a fair amount of state-level activity going on around smart growth and really demonstrating the integrated role of preservation and sort of all the other things that were happening with development. I hope that remains, even though the kind of the term smart growth has drifted off into the sidelines as far as kind of an active term right now. But the concept I think is still good, which is that preservation doesn't exist kind of on an island or by itself. It's really more of an integrated look at community preservation. And you sort of suggested with the Venn diagram and with the kind of the list of all things that go together. But I sense that was a much higher level of volume on that concept when it was around before. And I don't think we should lose that how important that is. Because I fear that people see preservation as a standalone cause in a way, and don't realize it is in fact an integral part of everything else that goes on with good development, and sustainable neighborhoods,
And I think this document, hopefully Chris achieved the goal. If you remember going back to the work session, candidly being the author of the 2007 one, that was a fault, but I'm not a historic preservation planner. One of our real goals of this one was really to bring in that it wasn't just this standalone
Yep.
throwaway element that we did. So that's why I think Chris's strategy from the beginning of doing the Venn diagram and tying it in, now that this comes in off the heels of our environment and sustainability element, is really bringing in and capturing many of the things, in fact, that the commission brought up. And that's why, the discussion of the subsequent eras that weren't discussed in the first
Yep.
one and everything else, trying just to lay that groundwork throughout.
and go ahead.
I can fill in just a little bit. I think I have, my fear of the fetishization of, historic structures is, keeps me up at night. So it's like, so when John's talking about contextual importance and the contributing factor among many others, I think we've begun to put language in that's really great. And I think breaking it into economic and social is wonderful. But I think we're still sort of giving 6 to 8 paragraphs to why historic is great, and somewhere early on in those 6 paragraphs, there should be the understanding that change is also good and historic contributes to that as well. So part of the sort of smart growth piece that part of the reason we've kind of left it behind from a, almost religious standpoint, right, smart growth, is that society's changed in the last 10 years. We have a different kind of work environment. We have a different kind of social environment that we didn't have. And our built environment's only slowly starting to catch up to folks who work different hours than they did, 9 to 5, even just 10 years ago, much less like 2003. And so, and their social aspects have changed too. The actual, door-to-door suburban shopping, model is kind of gone. It's broken apart. We don't quite know where it's going to fall, but it's probably more experience-based. And there's different things going on that the historic element can contribute to differently. And I think in a lot of ways we don't know how it's going to contribute just yet, because we don't entirely know what the built environment's going to be responding to this new work and live sort of aspect. So it's probably not as easy as we say, look, smart growth is still like, in its formulaic way, it's still great. Right now we're kind of in the feeling things out phase. And so some language in there that would talk about how a historic element, any historic element, whether it's a streetscape or architecture or an environment of, a building typology like the live work units or whatever it is, is an idea, and there'll be some historic elements within that that can continue to contribute a historical timeline of that change, but all of it is part of change. So I don't know how exactly to phrase that and put that in there, but like it still sounds to me when I read it, it's a great document, and it's come a long way. It feels very sophisticated, and but what I still think is maybe missing is a little bit of the sort of inclusiveness of the importance of change, and it feels a little bit defensive about how important historic preservation is still. I don't know. I can't really think of a great example.
Yeah, and I think HCC made a nod to that in their comments too, with the idea that historic research should be allowed to evolve. I mean, it's maybe a little bit gentler language, but I think I think you're right. There's a new theme there, which is that instead of trying to stop everything dead in its tracks and preserve it, in
It's
a
integrating.
static way, I think there's probably a larger recognition that it has to have a bit more of a dynamic quality, and whether it's evolving or changing or fixing or updating, whatever word you want to use. I mean, we have towns around here very successful where businesses are thriving in historic buildings, but they've done some things to make them more, viable as a modern building, whether it's HVAC and windows that are more energy efficient, or it's solar panels on the roof, whatever it is. It's things that you're just going to have to really do if you expect the building to live on. And we may have been a little bit too strict against some of those things in the past. So it makes sense. Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes into there's a section here that I think is great that talks about updating the design guidelines for both districts. And I think that's where a lot of the rubber meets the road as far as guidance for how we address some of these site especially since this document has a rather extensive list of potential other resources, whether the intent is that, hey, these are things that could be designated in the future or things that need special consideration. I think the updating of the guidelines to that effect and giving the commission some guidance of, look, here are how we should be, here's how the city wants to address change and modification and updates to structures that may not be designated or may not be, as historically important but still have some value, but how we want to allow them to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll more than likely have more value if they're within a context of change that stretches for decades.
So the guidelines apply specifically to the two historic districts, not to other sites or future individually designated sites. Are sort of district specific. So I'm not sure how that would apply to stuff that gets designated individually in the future, but I think we do need to have some more detailed framework that's probably not in the master plan, it's probably not in the ordinance, but sort of laying out the rules of the road for the various commissioners as they evaluate these things.
So, and this is again where Chris and I now are trying to take a discussion and get it into a point so we can sort of amend. So, to Commissioner Hopkins' first point, does the commission feel it's more appropriate for that sort of larger, higher level statement about dynamic change and integrating this and change comes with it? Should that be something that you would be looking for more in, like in the section that has the Venn diagram where Chris is laying out essentially the role of historic preservation. I want to make sure we're putting some of these comments where they actually belong. If we're looking for a recommendation, an action item, if we're looking to amend a specific chapter or that. So with the first one, if it's taking your points, which I totally agree with and think they're completely valid, it's more putting it more towards the front with the intro to lay it out as we lay out with everything else. To Commissioner Wessel's point about the design guidelines, that is a discussion we did have as staff. Again, with this master plan basically being in place for a decade, we were, it's funny to say, historic preservation, we're not just looking backwards. We're looking to potentially things that we don't even know that may be designated going forward. So if your discussion is not just with Chris's statement about reviewing the existing design guidelines, but maybe adding an additional statement about something along the lines of expanding the framework for any future design guidelines or something along those lines.
I think Matt's statement at the beginning or sentiment at the beginning is absolutely perfect. My concern is,
It's putting it in place.
It's a very broad statement. So how do you implement that, especially on individual sites or on sites that haven't been designated yet? It would be good to establish some sort of framework for what the goals are.
Even if it's aspirational language at this point, I mean, that's a heavy
Yeah,
pull, what we're talking about. So I think, we've sort of, and it's not the easy what you've done. What you put together was difficult, but it's what I think is expected, fully expected, and then it's really well done in this exhibit. And then we have these two other pieces of fruit. They're at the very top of the tree. So we got a heavy climb to get all the way up there and pick this idea of how do you integrate preservation with change. How do you understand the evolution of the built environment, and how do you put a framework on what we don't even know is going to happen?
Yeah, I wonder if it's a subtle shift from
That's tough.
being a preservation-focused policy to a, more of an evolution-based document. I still sense that the tone of some of the older versions of this, whether it's the guidelines or the actual components of the master plan, we're essentially stopping buildings dead in their tracks and incenting owners and users to bring them up to some level of restoration, right? And that was the fundamental goal, which is not a bad thing. And that, I think, was really the focus of most of the prior policies. And I think the interesting shift is that now it's that plus the idea of also readying them and posturing them for use 30 years into the future with who knows what use, right? Instead of living museum pieces, something that really do mesh more integrally with the viable commercial or residential area. And that's not a bad thing to acknowledge. I mean, frankly, if it was said, it's a shift in policy in a way, or a shift in focus, not away from the other, but to include and kind of expand the perspective a little bit.
And I think, and Chris can obviously jump in, we were trying to express that so it's disparately spread throughout the document subtly, so maybe the goal is to try to synthesize this, because one of our goals, staff.
For the update. I mean, I think that's a core idea right up front. Here's why an update's necessary now.
Because one of the discussions we had as staff was to, just to the chair's point, is historic preservation now can be done in multiple ways. It no longer has to be essentially creating a museum piece, because that, just to the point you all are making, makes it actually exclusionary and doesn't make it something that's conducive for inclusion in a city moving forward. So I think maybe if we go back through, look at the parts, and get these two things, these two main points put in.
Good. One other quick little point I wanted to revisit. If you could call up the diagram that sort of listed all of the, I guess it's sort of the pros list of preservation, or the positive aspects of
In
it.
the document or in the?
I'm sorry, it was in your presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, the economic development.
The Venn diagram.
Oh, the.
No, it was more like the, well, let's see what it would have been. Keep going forward again. What was the little bubble diagram there?
This one is the different aspects of the
Right, it
preservation.
wasn't that. Well, I'll tell you what the point is. You can decide where it slots in. What I was sensing was you had all the great points. It was, what it contributes to economic development and neighborhood sustainability. We have talked in the past about the value of it in terms of a sense of place, and there's this idea of experiential. So there's the concrete stuff you can measure, like economic, those sorts of things. But I think experiential becomes almost it's the most unique thing about it, that whatever we can do to continue this, with a quickly dwindling historic areas around and sort of the homogeneousness of, a lot of new development. That I don't think is to be lost. It's a value point. I want to make sure we continue.
Yeah, I
to
think
emphasize.
unique's a great word, and, it probably ought to be in there somewhere. It's a, neighborhoods, blocks, buildings all have personalities, and that's one of the major contributing factors of anything historic is a contextual piece of personality that you wouldn't be able to get from a plaque. You can only get it from an environment, building typology, or the actual architectural details of a structure.
I think it's somewhat stating the obvious, but it's always a lost point, I think,
It is.
when we get
I
into
agree.
some of the specifics about designation and all that.
And for me, too, just before I forget, sorry, Dan,
No, go ahead,
because I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
forget,
No.
is that, the pros are great, and again, I think we're being a little defensive by saying, I'm getting really nitpicky, but like the language is a little defensive to say, this is great, it does these great things. You want some recognition in there of the cons, too, of the risks, the constraints, the, potential pitfalls of historic preservation, and I think, some recognition in there of that is, as not warnings, but, sort of, things to be considered
Gotcha.
when doing the next set of design guidelines, when updating design guidelines, when considering which part of a property or structure or neighborhood is historically significant. So, whenever I see a pro list, I need a con list, but that's overly simplified.
Okay, sounds good. Danny, did you have something?
I mean, maybe I'm getting a little crazy, but, I really, played with the idea about it being historic, but it also being new, because I really struggle with that when, and I like the fact that you did include downtown Crown, because there is an element of history, but there's an element of new history that's getting developed, and I liked the fact that we start looking at that and thinking about it now, because it is the beginning of an era, and I think that in and of itself is historic, and that concept is probably very weird to folks to think about something new being historic, and I kind of played around with that. I don't know whether anybody
I think
else
you're dead
kind
on.
of
I think you're dead on. I think that's kind of what we're.
Right, I think-
I'm sort of
yeah,
not
right.
explaining very well, but it's
right.
like.
Yeah, that's
The
what.
evolution of the built environment
Right.
and what are the aspects of that to contribute, and then having historic elements within that that then you see by context and contrast, this is here now, this is, one form of built environment, and then next to it is something else, and that context creates the story that you wouldn't have if you
Right.
separate it out and put it under a glass dome, and or if you tried to replicate it into something that's monotonous.
Yeah, it's funny. I think calling something historic, you immediately go to like whatever the Secretary of the Interior says is historic, 50 years,
Right.
whatever it is. But it's interesting because, when the Kentlands was launched, they actually have a historic trust from day one, when, because they understood there was a story to be preserved even from the very first day. So
Exactly.
there's nothing wrong with putting in that context. I think it's
Right.
actually kind of an interesting idea. Cool. Any other comments or concerns? I guess the next step is that you're going to take a little bit of this and
We'll integrate it into the document before we send it out for our 60-day advertising period.
did you have any other questions, or did you get what you were looking for?
We just wanted, we wanted to give the commission the bite of the apple, so it's anything down to, we don't like this graphic, we'd like to see an additional recommendation, we're happy with the structure, we want to see something restructured, so again, this is just really the opportunity before it, formally gets advertised, and then sort of your role changes, that it can be the open dialogue here about things, anything you're envisioning. So, again, the recommendations are always the meat. This is the stuff that's going to drive, potential work items, strategic plans, strategic objectives over the next coming decade.
Sure.
So, the aspirational tone is great, but if there's anything the commission can think of to translate these into a more direct recommendation or action item, that we would definitely like to hear that
The only
also.
thing I'd add in terms of getting into the process of public hearing and ultimately adoption is to kind of have in your back pocket, if not as an introduction to presentations you're doing in the course of this process, a little bit about what the innovation is in this world in general. There's a 10-year, not only are we talking about our own policy that's 10 plus years old, but there's also, I think, probably around the room 10 plus years old thinking about how it should be managed and how it should be thought about. And there's probably some good examples from other communities or from the industry in general or from the academic side that just sort of sets up a little different expectation about what we should be aspiring to maybe as we get into this. That wouldn't hurt, I don't think.
Forward-thinking historians.
What's that?
Forward-thinking historians, is that what you're looking for? Not
I
too
guess.
long.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. There's got to be. I mean, I know it's evolving.
Yeah.
I've been, you read a lot of, really esoteric stuff about people who are struggling with this. That's why I'm saying I think what we're throwing out is really hard, and I frankly don't expect you to come up with a great solution to some of it. But it's just too hard.
It's community.
But I mean, there's
There.
PhDs out there running around in circles trying to figure it out. So I'm not. I have high expectations for us, but somewhere there's a limit. But taking a crack at it would be great. And I think but I think back down at the practical level too. I just love to give a quick plug to imagery too. So I've been bugging Rob about it for 20 years or whatever, but. There's a great number of photographs, great balance of
That was
graphics
intentional. We
to-
started with environment and
yeah.
sustainability, and we wanted to start bringing these more in
It's
line.
really helpful. It's
Yeah.
Unbelievably helpful. I mean, this is a great document.
Yeah.
I know that I should know everything that's in here, but every time I read it, I'm still shocked again
Yeah.
about the great
Yeah.
information that's in here. And I
Yeah.
think part of that is just getting the photographs in there. And they're not just photographs of the buildings, like we were talking about. There's some
What's the
photographs of
era?
streetscapes.
Right.
There's some photographs of overhead sort of planning shots, and so it's really well done from a diagram and photographic standpoint. The imagery is great.
I mean, and I thought about that when you talked about adaptive reuse and especially the cannery and how, you kept the main
That's a
kind
great
of,
example.
it's an excellent example of you kept the main theme of how it looked years ago when it was cannery, now what it looks like now, and it's juice. And it is
You can't be
fantastic to
explained in
look
words
at it.
either.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah,
two
the visual
photographs
is
are
really
perfect.
good.
Yeah.
Great. Let me note, Commissioner White couldn't be here tonight, but did submit some great comments to you guys. You'll take those sort of,
Well, again, as we're sort of mentioning, we're sort of looking for, right now we're viewing these as her individual comments. We want to know if this is, supported by the commission. So everything we've been talking about now, sort of you collectively as a group have moved forward. So I just want to make sure, because she has, essentially 3 bullet points and some of them have, essentially a sub-point, if the commission is in agreement.
I mean, I think I agree with the sentiment of all 3 of her points. And I share the concern, and I think it's more of a concern of perception and how this list of potential resources is really interpreted by people who read this. Because I'm not quite clear. It says the text says that these areas may be considered for historic designation, and it's sort of neutral. There's no position there. It's here's a list of properties that are
So-
1965 and
So we could
older.
explain, so this is sort of a holdover from the previous one, and the difficulty is, we essentially did the critical look at, over the coming decade, under the 50-year rule, what potentially could be coming in. And as is sort of mentioned, and as Chris wrote in one of his objectives and action items, we don't have all the reports or all the information. So part of what the Planning Commission brought up at the previous work session last year was identifying places that could be catalyzing for redevelopment. Unfortunately, by the time we got this, and for us to do the inventories for every single one of those properties, we'd never get a master plan moving forward. So at least we wanted to identify them, and then Chris wrote as an action item, secure funding, get the inventories done. So this is laying the groundwork. So I understand if we had more to say, we would.
Okay.
But we felt it was important to at least, over the course of the life of this master plan, get those properties out there and identify going forward. So even if a redevelopment project comes in subsequently and we haven't gotten the inventory, we can go to the master plan and go, hold on, this is something, we may want to look at before we fully move forward. Or, designate it, not designate it, figure out ways to integrate it and retain aspects of it. So that's sort of what the purpose of that was.
Yeah, I think we asked for some of that for all those reasons, and
Yeah,
just
I-
sort of a heads up.
I'm just picturing if I had a property on this list.
Yeah, no, I'd be
I'd
freaked
say,
out.
well,
Yeah.
what the heck is the city going
Right,
to do?
exactly.
What's coming down the road for my property?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
So,
Yeah. But all the more reason, right, to put it up there and be sort of brutally
Yeah.
honest with everybody that, that these are things that could be, should be, might not be looked at. And so, was there a gap? It was a few days ago that I read it, but is there a gap between the list of potential properties and the text that talked about how we need to stage all the aspects that have not gone into that research? Or is it right above it? Is there like a couple sections in between?
I see what you mean. Yeah, I believe there is.
Yeah, so maybe, I think I did have to make the leap. I vaguely remember going, the list started,
Gotcha.
what's this list for? And then I remember what the list is for, but. So
We can
maybe
try
we
to
have
make that smoother.
Yeah, maybe we have to-
and maybe adding some of what you just said to us about, the intent of this list is to identify properties for further evaluation, explain just a little bit more what the list is and what the list isn't.
Yeah, skip the legalese and just say, here's a bunch of stuff that could very well fall into a category, but we really just don't have enough information to make a call any which way.
Yeah, this isn't to be inferred as these are resources of
Right.
note.
Yeah.
Okay. So that essentially addresses the first comment. The second comment was related.
I actually don't entirely agree with the second point,
Yeah.
which is about identifying sort of a single period to identify as Gaithersburg. Because I think there's kind of booms and busts over the course of history that are represented in some of the buildup, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's directly contrary to our next thought, which is, and also what we were sort of starting to think about, unless I'm misunderstanding what she's saying in that second bullet. But yeah, my guess is that she actually is pulling for sort of a certain era of innovation that happened uniquely in Gaithersburg, because it's really, if you were a planner and you're sitting in, Detroit at a meeting, Gaithersburg, you're going to say, oh, I know, 1983 to 1992, it was Kentlands, blah, 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 and that's it, right? So I think we're busting past that in this element, way past that. So I'm not sure. I think I understand where that comes
Well,
from.
and I think it's,
Agree with it.
I don't want to put words in
Yeah.
her mouth, but I think it's, and my concern would be, and I'm not sure you solve it in the master plan, but again, making the determination about what's historic.
Mhm.
From my time on the HDC, there were plenty of discussions and debates about, somebody wants to modify a carport that was built in 1960. Oh, that's 50 years old. Should we allow that? That may be that's a great example of 1960s carport architecture. Should we let this poor lady, take this rusting thing down or make her restore it?
Right.
So I think there's some concern about trying to somehow define what our framework is for determining if it's historic. And again, that may not be a master plan.
It is. We have it as a recommendation. One of the back ones, and this was another major discussion among staff, was the references to tiering. So we wanted to set up in the beginning the different eras, and we give examples. And Chris, greatly mentions, this is found all throughout the county. So again, we're not doing these things. Then we have the recommendation, just because we're not there yet, of essentially going through some of these things in tiering, so when it comes before the HDC, they can understand right off the bat, this is a low retention value, sort of like the forest con thing. This is a low retention value forest. We don't have to save carports. Let's focus.
Makes
This
more
goes to that
science.
longer list also. This is stuff we should put under glass and put in the museum. This is the stuff we should find, pay homage to, but integrate into other things. This is other ones. Let's not stress about this because it has that 50-year age limit. So that is sort of already in the document.
Good. All right.
That's great.
The last one.
Yeah, the Main Street program, I'm not sure where that crosses paths with actual preservation, but because there's another sort of level of criteria and advocacy for Main Street programs, but.
Yeah, and I think it focuses a lot more on what we were sort of starting to talk about, which is, contextual, environments, cohesive contextual environments rather than the sort of aspects, architectural aspects or planning aspects. It has more to do with how business was done or how people used the building at one point or another. And how do we sort of convey that to the next set of folks who are going to use that for something different? So the National Main Streets program is much more about the community than it is about it's much more than it is about the sort of architectural details, about the typology. So I think it's a great note that there's probably things we can learn from, looking at those economically based programs rather than the sort of architecturally based programs.
Very good. All right, anything else you want to throw into that discussion? No? Okay. Good to go?
Yes, so
Okay.
again, the process will be, we're going to sit back now, take these comments, work it, massage it, read it internally, hopefully do one final edit, and then hopefully have it hit the streets as we've done in the past. The Planning Commission and the Mayor and Council will be notified once the 60-day comment period begins. Essentially the ongoing master plan process page will be put on the city's website under the master plan. The record will be kept there. Again, we're tentatively looking at a January 16th date for the joint public hearing. And we'll just go from there. So again, both Chris and I thank you for your input. And
Good work.
We think it was good points.
Thank
Good
you.
work.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Move this forward. All right, great.
Thank you.
So, where we go next? The draft 2018 Planning Commission
Right.
meeting and submission calendar.
Yep, as in years past, we always bring you guys the Planning Commission calendar for 2018, or the next year, in this case 2018. The Planning Commission dates are on there, again, the same as years past, first and the third Wednesday, obviously some changes depending on holidays.
August and December, one
Yeah,
meeting.
only one of those meetings, yep. I will note, the dates that are on there for submission deadlines, we are relooking at those actually after discussion today. So those may change around a little bit, but for your purposes, again, the meeting dates would be unchanged by that.
So internally, in the office with staff, are there any issues with submission or submittal dates with lead time, with expectations from applicants?
That's kind of the discussion we had today. We want to make sure that we have ample time to do a thorough and a complete review of things. We don't want to obviously bring stuff to the commission that is not ready, or we don't have enough time to review. I mean, we don't want to do tons of amendments, obviously,
Agreed.
on plans and things that you missed. So it's something, again, we just need to work internally to make sure that we are still meeting the objective of, a quick turnaround as fast as possible for applicants and for developers, and be as developer-friendly as possible in many situations, but also make sure we also do get the amount of time reviewed for plans that it deserves.
Good. Yeah, I don't see any issues right now with the overall framework.
Doesn't appear to be any, but we just get to eat the sausage. We don't have to make it. So.
Just watch it get made.
Yeah, sometimes.
All
Yeah.
right, good. So anything else you need from us?
Nope, that's it. And like I said, we'll probably bring back another draft in the future if we do change some of the review times. Like I said, currently we have about a 2-week turnaround on most of our stuff between our reviews and internal discussions before we bring it on to the commission. So.
Cool.
Sounds good. All right. And kind of related to that, you're moving into, maybe you already have, applicants can submit everything online now or post everything, is that right?
I believe we're moving towards that.
Okay.
We haven't really implemented that for plan review yet. We still
Okay.
require.
Just permitting.
When we've started to digital reviews a lot of stuff, but we still do require hard copies submitted, and because we do have to route plans out to other reviewers in the city and externally that do so like paper. So, but we are moving more towards digital reviews and digital submissions.
Okay. I wonder if that won't help a little bit on that.
Yeah, so we're setting the standards here at City Hall. We just haven't gotten that out to our full group yet. Okay.
Real good.
That's great.
Anything else? No? All right, so anything else from staff? While you have the floor.
Yeah.
Hey, Jasmine.
Something?
Hello. Just to let you know, we're coming up to the planning awards, actually approaching November 1st, 6:15. I sent an email out to see who's going to be there. So just let me know by the end of this week if you're able to attend. So on our invitation, we said 6:15, but we probably won't start the actual ceremony until 6:30.
Oh, don't tell me that.
Yeah.
Starting
Be
at
there at
6:10.
So during the September 19th Planning Commission meeting, each commissioner had volunteered to do a write-up for each project.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
So I'm going to need those write-ups by the 27th of October, because we're going to take those write-ups and put it on the actual certificate.
Can you fire back out to us who said what to what, and maybe any background you have on that spreadsheet again, please?
Sure, I can email
Yeah,
you guys tomorrow.
Exactly. Just, yeah.
And
Doesn't matter what
also, Trudy had sent out an email about our social media outreach that we're
Yeah.
doing. So,
I responded.
so I got Matt's, I got Phil's.
So-
I don't know if anyone
so
else
you-
wants to.
Yeah, so do we,
I had my
you want us
picture
to give
taken.
you a photo?
Huh?
You want us to give you a photo? I see you got your camera.
I mean,
in.
I can take a photo. You can just email
or
me
I can
one.
submit you,
Selfie.
yeah, okay, right.
But yeah, but Amy McGuire created a nice little template
Yeah.
that we've been using to on our social media.
Okay.
And the In Gaithersburg newsletter came out today and had the Community Planning Week right up in it too, which was good. So, thanks for doing that.
Yep, you're welcome. That's all I have.
All right, great. Frank, looks like you want to say something.
I just say the Maryland Planning Commissioners Association is meeting on November 2nd in Easton. They have a training, and they actually had asked me to redo the open meetings presentation. I think in part there's really only one other local certified trainer, and the Assistant Attorney General was not available, so, but I will be doing that, I think it's at 1 p.m. in Easton, so
Good.
we will see you there, and I saw you were there. I did see on the website they have you listed with the Montgomery County Planning
They
Commission.
need to change that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I will take care of that tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm sure when they're putting, they have
I always tell them
many things to put in there.
Gaithersburg.
Yes, Gaithersburg City, it is important. Well, it's a municipal perspective too.
Right,
But anyway,
Yeah.
but I will see you then.
yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks, Frank. And that went very well, by the way. I went to the training we had here in the city for the open meetings, and it was very well attended. I was surprised.
It
at the crowd
definitely
that
was. And there were about
Well,
half of the, I think they estimated 85, about half were out of the city too. So folks, and partly that's because of the new requirement, not only to designate, but also to go through the training
Well,
itself.
the refreshments were good too. You know, the
Well,
city
there
puts
you
on a
go.
good party. Yeah, but good job with that. It went very well, I can say, from attending it in person. All right, from the commission, Danny, anything tonight?
No, I just have my hot pink on today.
Good for you.
Get
Well,
the candle
Trying to be
outside.
supportive.
Say why.
Trying to be supportive.
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Phil?
I wish Chris had stayed. There was the monthly Maryland Association
Yes.
of Historic District Commission newsletters featured Chris Berger and his report on economic impacts of historic districts and the city of Gaithersburg.
It was the top article.
Yeah, it was the headline article in their monthly.
What was that in?
It's the Maryland Association of Historic Districts Commissions.
Is there an
it's a-
online version?
Yeah, it is. It's all online.
Would you
It's
mind
a-
sending
it's
it
an email.
around?
Yeah, I'll
Thanks.
forward it around. It's a
Thanks.
statewide thing, and Chris's efforts got
That's good.
top billing.
Good to
so.
hear. As they should. All right, great, thank you. Anything else from staff? All set? Well, if not, thank you, have a good night, and we're adjourned.